Hello, I'm Angela Canwar. Welcome to the Spots of Time podcast. They say life happens, but as we know, it throws unexpected challenges, some big and some small. How do people overcome these hurdles? The Spots of Time podcast explores real life stories and how people successfully navigate and manage to move forward. Stephen Fry, entrepreneur, welcome to the podcast, The Spots of Time. You're my special guest for today. And thank you for taking time out to talk to me.
Pleasure.
So, as a young graduate, Oxford University, undergraduate in the early 80s, picturing that time.
Yes.
You stated that Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged was a book that left a really big impression on you. Could you tell us about what that book actually defined and actually meant to you?
It was the first time I'd encountered libertarianism as a political philosophy or as a rule of thought. It was the first time, having been brought up in the East End where everybody mucked in together, my earliest memories are, and I do remember being in a pram, one of those great big prams, and I remember looking out of the pram, and I was looking what I didn't know it was, but it was a bomb site. And so East London for me was places where we could play as kids and on bomb sites and explore things. But there was a very we us mentality about that because we were all in it together. And Mr. Attlee made sure we were all part of this welfare state, which had been brought in after the war, 1946, 47. And I was, as a boomer, I'm there as the first testers of this welfare state, which is a very we us collective concept. And reading Atlas, and then going back and reading Fountainhead, which was the one she wrote before that. But Atlas was the pivotal moment. I discovered what I meant and what me, and there was nothing wrong in being selfish. And that what was important is what I understood. And if I didn't feel comfortable in the we, that was okay. These concepts of collectivism were not necessarily the right thing.
Interestingly, at that time, especially during the world wars, community working together, pulling together was really important, and it was a fabric of society. But Ayn Rand is basically saying that society was in decline when corruption, favoritism, and cronyism basically override merit and productivity. So she was saying that if that is the case and it continues, and this book was written in 1957, then society is doomed. So she was kind of ahead of her time in terms of what she was stating.
All good philosophers, I think, are also prophets because they look and they look up. Philosophy is essentially understanding the love of human relationship with other humans. Philo and not philo pastry. The whole concept of a political philosophy that talked about the importance of I, me, as opposed to we, us, was very different. And I think that's what attracted me. That's what bit me. And I wanted to see how that worked.
But what impact did that book have on you? Because obviously it changed maybe the way you thought about certain things, how you viewed certain things, how you conducted your life in general. What were those elements that?
Without doubt, there were. Shortly after reading the book, I went up to Oxford, and I read theology and philosophy, and the concept of brave new world theology, post-Second Vatican Council, everything was changed. Nobody spoke Latin anymore, except I learned Latin and Greek, or first century Greek, and Aramaic. Well, it's something to do in your spare time. It was, but the philosophical concept was understanding what those languages were saying to the people that were speaking them and to the hearers of those languages. Words mean very little until they actually are understood in their concepts. And that was the whole point of the degree in theology, to understand the concepts. And the philosophy was understanding how the societies had put those concepts together. So that was I guess my first life was at university, which was teaching me how to think. I was taught how to learn at school, but I was now being taught how to think, or I learned how to think. It wasn't a taught degree; it was a research degree, and so teaching was. When I first arrived, I was given a 3 sheets of paper. The first sheet of paper was a list of books that I had to read that term. The second sheet of paper were a list of essays I had to write that term. And the third sheet of paper was a list of lectures that I might want to go to. Didn't have to, but I might want to go to that term. And this was the Michaelmas term and runs through to Christmas. And this was my first term in my first year. And I was thinking about, for the first time in my life, I was thinking about me, and that's what Ayn Rand had triggered.
When you say thinking about was that in the positive sense or maybe in a more selfish sense?
Oh, we're taught, we understand that if we start putting ourselves first, we're being selfish. And I think that's what I was challenging.
Mm-hmm. So this book obviously had some impact on the way you were thinking. How did that translate into your life, your general kind of encounters with people, situations you found yourself in?
Okay. Yeah, I think it was 26-year-old arriving in Oxford, working class background from the East End of London, surrounded by Etonians, Harrovians, and international students, all of whom knew how to behave. None of them behaved properly, but at least I knew how to hold a knife and fork, and how to behave in the refectory where we ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. It was a breakdown of a class system. There were 3 or 4 of us. We lived in the college who were classical working class boys. There was one from Leeds, one from, where did he come from? Harrogate, I think, and me from the East End. And it was a way of surviving was, well, there were 2 ways of surviving. You just immersed yourself in the we and was led by others, or you became the I and choose what you did. The 2 other working class lads, one was from a Pontefract, that's where he was from. Pontefract in Yorkshire was a mining town, and he was very we-based, we-focused. He'd been in Pontefract when the pit had closed because of Thatcher and the miners' strike, and he was very bitter about that, but believed his life belonged in a we. I didn't believe life belonged in a we. I'd read Ayn Rand, and so I knew that was different. And they went off and became part of the we, which they never fitted into. and class difference. And I stayed as an I, and got on really well with everybody because I was free and independent and told them to bugger off if I needed to.
Ultimately, what you're saying, that this book, Atlas Shrugged, it stemmed from there, that kind of attitude
That's
of
what that was. That it gave me a way of thinking that was libertarian, that was freedom making, and I became free from class.
That's what this book taught you. But then how would you say that translated to other areas of your life? For example, whether it's your personal life or your work life?
Nothing is unattainable. My father was landed gentry, and my mother was a Hoxton girl. So very classic end of the Second World War marriage, where two classes come together. And so I was the result of that class mash. And the net result is very simple, that British classism was there, it was a structure, but it wasn't important unless it needed to.
You know, sometimes when you read a book and you think, oh, we've got to recommend it to someone, and it may have had impact on you, but the next person might think, not sure about this. Again, it's subjective. But ultimately, this book has had impact on you in terms of the way you lead your life. So, as you said, it's have you carried that throughout your life in terms of the things you've done? Can you give us some examples? Can you give us some examples?
Whenever businesses have always been, whether I do something or not, has been based on me. Of course, I take other things into consideration, but the main driver, the main decision making is me. And that sounds incredibly selfish, but somebody's got to make a decision somewhere along the line at some time. And the best person to make the decisions about me is me.
Yeah, because you know yourself the best.
Because there's no one else to blame. So if I cock it up, it's my fault.
But then the flip side of that, of being that can have some negativities as well. That can come with some negativity.
It can look presumably selfish, but the I is also, what value can I add
to
other people? Because that's not collectivism, that's libertarianism, that's the freedom of learning from others.
So do you feel that this book kind of opened your mind in ways that you didn't think possible?
Oh, without doubt. But it would be crass for me to say that it was Ayn Rand that sparked the idea in me. I don't think she did. I think she was one of those philosophers, those books that I'd read in 1983 to 1986 and carried on reading, that were philosophers, it didn't matter who it was, but they all had an impact. But Ayn Rand started the dominoes collapsing.
Okay, so if you were to recommend any books now to anyone, what would you recommend to read?
I'd always choose something that was difficult, and which is probably why I haven't got a copy of Fountainhead. I'm going to have to get a copy. I've given it away, and I suspect I don't know who I gave it to, but I suspect I gave it to somebody at university. And it wouldn't surprise me. This person used to recommend me reading books all the time. He was an Anglican priest. His name was Leonard Pepper. He was known for being of a theology called the social gospel, which was predominantly socialist, majoritively socialist. And he was known as Red Pepper. Red Pepper was he was one of my tutors, and we met weekly, and we inevitably had an argument. And inevitably, I'm convinced it was him I gave it to. I'm thinking about it. I told him to read this because he was constantly giving me stuff to read.
Right.
Some of which I've still got, but he's dead now, so it doesn't matter. He's not getting.
But so Fountainhead would be maybe a book that you would like to recommend.
I think it would be.
Okay.
I think it would be. I think
Right.
start either the Fountainhead, or I think, Fountainhead. There was a couple, but I'm thinking I'd go for both of them: Atlas Shrugged and Fountainhead, and in any order. But they will challenge.
Okay. And like you say, read something that will challenge you and make you think, and ultimately may lead you down a very different path or an alternative path that person's on.
Well, I'm currently reading Nadine Dorries and The Plot, and it demonstrates that a dystopian society can exist within the last 10 years, and we now call it the Westminster bubble.
Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, Stephen, because Ayn Rand was obviously ahead of her time, like a lot of these philosophers.
Without doubt.
And I think that ultimately to share that is always of interest. So thank you so much for your time. And it's been interesting talking to you about it.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you for watching and listening. I have certainly taken great inspiration from today's podcast story and hope you have too. If you have a story you would like to share, get in touch via my YouTube channel, The Spots of Time Podcast, and please do click subscribe or connect with me on LinkedIn. Just search Angela Kanwar.